Okay, so James chapter 3. We moved from that introduction that we were hearing words intended for the 12 tribes scattered amongst the nations, about hearing the word versus doing the word, being doers of the word. We mentioned last week the issues of favoritism, especially looking upon the outside rather than the heart, as God does, we ought to as well. And it kind of concluded with a very famous passage as far as what people think about when they think about James's letter, faith without works, that he will show us faith with works. And we talked about that essential unity. God has created us as bodies and souls intended to be united. Similarly, then, our faith and our actions ought to be united. When they're not is when there's a problem. Kind of like when there's a soul but no body, or a body and no soul, we talk about that person being dead. So this has brought us now into this next eminently practical section. And so we'll take it a little piece at a time. Not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. All right, so we have a bit of a transition, but I think it's a smooth one. Remember, if we were just talking about faith and works intended to be together, well, then it's almost a nice logical extension to go where he's going here about being a teacher. Now, does this mean that fewer people should sign up to teach middle school science? No. So this is what kind of teaching is he talking about?
Teaching about God.
Scripture, teaching about God, morals. This is the teaching of the faith. This is to be a teacher in this sense is kind of like what James is doing right now, teaching us something about the faith. So why should fewer people rather than more be teachers?
And they wouldn't be hypocrites.
Not to be hypocrites. I mean, I think that's an excellent reason. Again, rather than just a subject material, you can know or not know the precepts of middle school science. It definitely helps you to know them in order to instruct others, the middle school kids, in middle school science. But depending on what you're teaching, your manner of life makes a difference. If, for instance, your child or grandchild was taking middle school science and it turns out that you found out that the teacher in question believed that the earth was flat, the moon landing was a hoax, and that taking pictures stole their soul, you might be concerned about the nature of education within that classroom. Because the two don't seem to overlap. You know, middle school science is probably like earth space science, you know, the water cycle and plate tectonics, and maybe some very the solar system kind of stuff. So you would assume that anyone who's going to instruct that would have not just a factual knowledge, but a kind of a working relationship with those concepts. And if they actually acted in a way that was antithetical to those concepts, you would kind of have to wonder, well, how seriously are they teaching them in the first place? what's the other thing about being a teacher, especially if it's of the faith or of the law, not just the hypocritical element of it?
You don't want to teach the wrong thing. You
Okay.
wanna know what the subject is, know what you're teaching,
Right.
so you don't pass on wrong information.
Yeah, I think that's right. The stakes are high if you are talking about someone's faith. Therefore, you want to get this right. Your the risk that you run when you misidentify the water cycle to sixth graders is relatively minimal. But the risk that you run when you say or teach something that winds up breaking a family and hurting souls.
Yes.
Jesus mentions when we hurt the little ones, it's better to have a millstone tied around your neck, thrown into the river. I just had this text conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, who was relating that a former classmate. She was not in my class in seminary, but we all overlapped, and she had recently died. Cancer, I believe, and I didn't realize how young she was, and that was kind of tragic news. This person was in one of the classes in seminary, however, that seemed to have a preponderance of angry people. It's funny, where I went to school, it seemed to have alternating years, like the cool year, the mean year, the cool year, the mean year. And I was in a cool year. Like we all got along together and everybody was just kind of easygoing. But then the year ahead of us and the year behind us were filled with internal arguments where people did not get it. Like within the class, they didn't get along. It was very stark. And then the class that followed after, they all got along together. So it was just kind of an interesting phenomenon. And I remember, and I wrote this last night, and this has to do with like colleagues in the church, a fellow clergy. I would rather they be dumb than mean. And I mean, ostensibly, we wish our clergy to be neither well-educated and smart and wise and faithful. But like if they, if you had to pick between the two, I would rather pick dumb than mean, because dumb clergy cause their own set of problems, but I think they're much more modest and manageable than mean clergy. Mean clergy can hurt people in a profoundly deep way that can cause a lot of problems for a very long time. I don't like speaking ill of colleagues, mainly because I try to keep the like this minimal level of charity. Like we don't really know a bunch of situations, and just because somebody's not my cup of tea or whatever, that doesn't make them bad or wrong or what have you. Because it's not a standard I want placed on me. I understand that I'm not everybody's cup of tea too. So if you ever hear me talk about somebody and say, well, he's not a good guy, like those are all the warning bells that I tend to get, like avoid. Because I save that for people who do genuinely destructive things. In this diocese, it's been many years now, but one of the leaders, this would be not quite 20 years ago, so let's say 17, 18 years ago, one of the leaders in trying to get the diocese to move out of the Episcopal Church over issues of mostly sexuality, turned out to be having like a 20-year affair with the church secretary. And caused a lot of damage to a lot of lives once that came out. Just even considering the horrible reality of clergy abuse. Um, I learned this phrase, being a medic and riding the ambulance, and it was, we are present for the worst 15 minutes of your life. And that was both a rallying call for ourselves, do your best, but it was also a reminder to not take it too personally how you were treated. Because you roll up into a situation, you don't know these folks at all, and you're trying to do your best by the patient, and the family is typically freaking out. Why? And why are they yelling at you? And why are they seem so unreasonable? What's the worst 15 minutes of their life? Somebody that they love is suffering and they're terrified, and maybe they're in horrible pain, maybe they're going to die. The possibilities are going to die. And this is not some average day. This is their most stressful circumstances. And so we had to be prepared. And if you've ever thought that first responders are a little too flat and cool in the way that they act, it's on purpose. It's 100%, because if we let our own emotions go up and down with the situation, we won't give good care. Like, I need to not cry over this person. I need to help them. And so if I can stay focused, then I can help them better. But, we're there for the worst 15 minutes of your life. And that experience was very formative for me in seminary and going on into early ministry, because in many cases, I'm still present for the worst 15 minutes of people's lives. Now, occasionally it's the best 15 minutes. That's nice too. But it also, I think, on the clergy side of it, ought to inspire a sense of deep humility. Why in the world would you let me be around your worst 15 minutes? Who am I to you? But you brought me into your home, you brought me into your family, you brought me into your life at this incredibly intimate time, incredibly vulnerable moment, with some sort of hope that I'm going to give you something helpful or good or precious at this lowest, most frightened, most painful time in your life. So that's a pretty high bar, but it's also, of all the people, you called me. And I try to take that very, very seriously. It is an incredible privilege to be brought in, for instance, at someone's deathbed. It's a miserable privilege. I'm not saying it's fun, but I am saying just the mere fact of being allowed, being asked to be there is really, really remarkable. And when I think about, not many of you should be teachers, I think about stuff like that. Not everybody ought to be entrusted with those kind of moments. Not everybody ought to be entrusted with that kind of influence. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, you're not good enough. I just mean like some people just aren't built to handle that kind of stress or pressure. Some people aren't knowledgeable enough to know, to not say something about God needed another flower in his garden, and that's why he plucked your mother. I mean, whatever. I've heard some awful stuff.
Yeah.
And it can be very well intentioned, but it's wrong. Like, ooh, don't do that. But also, I think there is an element of, we desire to be helpful as disciples of Christ. I think that is a transformative element of your life. And I think, as a matter of fact, there's a great commission and a commandment in there that we want to rightly apply. But especially early on, our fervor can be bigger than our capacity. Our desire to help can outstrip our skill or our knowledge or our ability. And so maybe we take a back seat for a while rather than elbowing our way up front to lead the way, because it's just not time yet. We maybe have a different level of expectation of let's say, a third grade teacher who is just out of school and it's the very first job versus the third grade teacher who's done it for 20 years. The wisdom of experience maybe has sort of proven their reliability. And I think there's also maybe an element of that as well. I don't find this to be a moral quality of, well, some people just aren't good enough. It's just more of like, well, maybe you're not built for it. Maybe you're not ready for it. Maybe the timing is not right. And every time we get a layout of the various vocations, calls, and giftings within the New Testament, say in 1 Corinthians 12, it is that God has called these things and equipped different people to do different things for the sake of one body. And it just might not be your call. And that should be okay. It should be okay that different people are built and equipped to do different things because all those things need to be done. Teaching is important, but it's not the only thing. And it's not the only worthwhile thing. And it didn't make you better. It's just different. And it feels like I've got a lot to say about that part of it. It's just because that one's real personal for me.
Well, I think that's true. So I'll give you an example in my own life. I've never entrusted Reese's theological education to anyone other than myself until he started coming here. And then I heard you talking to the kids one day and I thought, you know what? He's better at it than I am. I'm gonna, and Lula and Missy, but that was a shift for me.
Yeah.
A huge one, because I'm like, sometimes when we have a lot of theological education, we're constantly vetting everybody else's.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we think, oh, I'm the only one that can do it. And then I realized, you have a way with kids, and so does Lula and Missy, and I thought, it was actually relieved to be able to pass it off to someone who could take Reese to a place where he really needed to be led.
Yeah.
That I recognized, I'm not really that person. And so when you say you take it seriously, I've actually seen it demonstrated boots on the ground in reality here, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Thank you. And I take that, very, very profoundly, because it is a holy trust that people, and the funny thing is I know that I'm very casual. I'm it's no surprise. I mean, here I am in shorts for the millionth time. And even when I preach, it's super conversational. I'm not a very formal preacher. It's more like I'm trying to talk to people, which is at least in my head the way it works. But I always want to take that very, very seriously, that what I do, it's important, if only for the fact that it's like playing with dynamite. Like I would not want to hurt someone inadvertently because I was careless or because I was, just fooling around. Just being behind the pulpit as goofy as I can be, I always try to take it with an air of seriousness, even the silly stuff. I'll share this periodically. But I've got this little prayer that I say as I walk off the pulpit pretty much every Sunday, and it's roughly, Lord, that which comes of me, may it fall away, but that which comes of you, may it find good soil in the heart of your faithful people and bear fruit 100-fold. In the sense of, if I just said something stupid, wrong, hurtful, whether it was inadvertent or not, that you would just let that, God, go in one ear and out the other. And the stuff that you said through me, whether I realized it or not, but they're supposed to listen, let that stick. Because I'm not sure I know the difference sometimes, but you do. Therefore, please.
Well, I think that you can be casual and relatable in your presentation, but you are not theologically casual. I think that's the difference.
Well, and
that's what I said.
Thank you.
So when you talk about this, because actually I was thinking a lot about this, that it's true. There's almost theological stuff. You can be casual and still be theologically sound.
Sure.
And
That's the hope. That's the hope. I will accept a compliment because that's my goal. And I think it's the right one. And it's one of the reasons, again, like why I try to not be publicly critical of colleagues, because my fundamental hope is everybody's doing their best. Like, yeah, they're trying, they're built differently than I am, and but they're still doing their darndest for the sake of the Lord. And the issue would be is when people do overtly bad, and then I will say something, but even still try to keep it as bland as possible, just because well, let's get into more, because I think it's all this is going to kind of tie together. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits in the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Ouch. Rather sharp. Why do you think, pious speculation, why do you think James is so overtly negative about the tongue? Because I'll say he doesn't pull any punches, and he comes down pretty hard on, he just said the tongue is full of hell.
Well, he's probably just recently seen it in his congregation.
It could very easily be, right off of a real life example.
Well, the tongue is really, sometimes when we get angry, it's part of our brokenness, the tongue will take on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And then, because I struggle with that. I was not raised in the Christian faith. I was raised sort of anti-Christian. We just a humanist. And I didn't come to Christianity until my late 30s. So my tongue still seems to have a life of its own
Yeah.
sometimes. It can be critical. And then my brain has to kick in and go, you know what, I shouldn't have said that, because now that I'm looking at it through the lens of Christianity, we all make mistakes, and who am I to criticize? You know what, I do plenty of stuff without thinking or whatever, so I think the tongue, it gets away from us, and if we're not mindful, and if we're not thinking of the filter of
Yeah.
God's love. I know the things that come out of my mouth, an hour later, I'm like, oh, why did I say that? I literally had to call up my veterinarian yesterday to apologize for the way that I spoke to the person at the desk.
Yeesh.
It wasn't ugly, I didn't raise my voice.
Right. But it doesn't take much, does
But I
it?
had an attitude with her
Yeah.
about something that wasn't her fault, and so I was like, an hour later, Diane, I'm sorry, I had an attitude and it's not your fault.
Yeah.
So. It really applies to me.
100%.
Yeah.
So the phenomenology of this is really, you kind of feel like a college sophomore who has hit their first joint, and he's like, wow, man, have you ever, whoa. But the truth of the matter is, our ability to speak is mysteriously, wonderfully miraculous. I have something inside my mind, a thought, an idea, an expression, a feeling, a construct, whatever. And somehow I'm going to put it in your brain.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing. If you think about it. I do that by vibrating organs that then vibrate the air molecules that then vibrate organs inside of you that then gets translated via electrochemical impulses into your brain. And now the thought that was in my mind is now in your mind. And it exists outside of me. And that's really kind of amazing when you think of it. But there is something that, again, the playing with dynamite element. Dynamite's amazing too. This very small quantity of a substance can unleash this disproportionately large amount of energy. And that energy can be used in constructive ways or destructive ways. And even if you're trying to use it constructively, but you're careless, it can turn destructive super easy. The tongue is a small part of our body as far as a percentage is concerned, and yet it is the primary vehicle in the expression of our interior thoughts to the outside world. And that becomes this really high bar of responsibility. I think we talked about this maybe early on in that first chapter, but consider people whose lives have been fundamentally altered by what someone else would consider a stray comment. Either small children who have carried a wound for decades, or have been inspired to become something they never would have by someone who, if they could go back to it, go back to that person, go back to that moment. Remember when you said that thing to me? And how many times does the person say, what thing? What? I don't even, I mean, I'm glad that made a good difference, or I'm sorry it made a bad difference. I don't even remember. But it's not so much what comes out of us as it is what the other person receives. And that's kind of the amazing thing about communication as well, is that this idea that's in my mind, I want it to be in your mind, but there is a gap between my mind and your mind, and it's communication that bridges that gap. And if the communication is good, then the picture in both of our minds is the same, and the communication is impaired somehow, then the picture in my mind is different than what was received in your mind, for good or for bad. How many times have you read something, an email or a text, and you weren't sure if the person was happy or angry?
Yeah.
Because there's no tone.
There's no tone. Are they being a smart aleck, sarcastic jerk? Or was that just kind of a matter of fact, somewhat blunt way to put it?
Or were they being playful?
Or yeah, was it just sort of, kind of offhanded, goofing around or whatever? And so just that, again, the holy mystery of communication, and so much of it happening through our speech. And through that speech, our word choice, our inflections, our tone.
Well, one of the things too that I was thinking about is, and it still exists today, people culturally interpret things different regions of the country, maybe your own family can interpret something in language, and you said X to me, but that's not what I meant, but that's what you said. Well, that word is translated as a different meaning. So when he's talking about the tongue too and being a good teacher, I sort of think about him as someone who's, a teacher has to understand what the actual meaning is.
Yeah.
Because you've got all of these people coming to this faith from very different places, and to them culturally, regionally, in the diaspora, whatever, it can mean different things. So it's like, even though you may mean something with your tongue, you really don't understand what you're teaching, maybe you don't communicate it. You're trying to get the
Right.
same, this is a thing that is new, and we're trying to teach it to you who all have different faith backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, if you don't know it well enough, will you be able to express it clearly enough? Especially when there's multiple ways it could be, it could be received. So he gives three major metaphors here, and they're similar but different. Okay. The bit that goes into a horse, the rudder on a ship, and the spark that starts a forest fire. So let's look at those in particular, because they're similar in the sense of something small results in a large effect. One of my favorite martial arts phrases was little hinges swing big doors. But the three kind of take it in a slightly different direction each time. So when we think about a bit in a horse, what is the metaphor intending to convey there? First of all, what's a bit?
Well, it's in the horse's mouth, and it's using to turn the head of the horse to basically directional.
Yeah.
But
So
it's tiny and it's doing a lot.
right. So a horse a horse's jaw is built differently than ours, although we kind of have we've got a little bit of space as well behind our molars where our jaws have a little bit of a gap, and a horse has a much bigger gap. And so the bit is typically a middle bar that the reins are fastened on either side, and it fits deep into a horse's mouth where its teeth aren't crunching on it. Its mouth can close, but because there's this gap, it sort of sits there, but kind of hooked behind their molars at the back part of their jaw. And so if you think about it, that's a pretty, there's a lot of torque, because this is true. This is just biomechanical, and it's true in almost every sense of the usage. But the direction that your head is pointed is by and large where your body's going.
Okay.
And that's just the way it works for all sorts of reasons. So this relatively small piece, and a bit is probably, maybe a foot long, maybe smaller than that. And it's not even super big. I didn't grow up around horses. Horses were a novelty to me. I think we went to a horse riding stable once or twice. I remember we did this tour out west, and we did horses in Bryce Canyon, Utah, and we did mules in the Grand Canyon. And that was super fun. As a matter of fact, I remember my mom on the Grand Canyon, I don't think there were any bits. You just sort of sat there on this mule, and they did all the work. But hers was called Old Blind Bobby. And Old Blind Bobby was old and blind. And so these mules who do this trip like twice a day, every day, knew exactly where to step and how to do it. And they take you to the edge of the path several times where you're literally, but they're sure-footed and they know what they're doing. But on top of them, it's a little disconcerting because you think this horse or this mule is blind. And what if they don't see the fact that the step is like, oh my gosh, we're all going to die. But again, getting on those animals, especially if I know some people are raised with them or they've done it a bunch of times, whatever. I'm continually impressed and intimidated by the size of horses. A horse in a picture book or on TV looks much different than standing in front of one. You stand in front of one, and even relatively modest horses are really big. And you feel them move, and you're like, you know what? If something actually happened, what am I going to do to stop it? And this whole, you have to walk in this way and don't walk behind them, and you have to approach in this, why? Because if they kick you, they will kill you.
Yeah.
Because that animal is like 2,000 pounds of muscle. And if something happened and they fell on you, you will die. You're going to be paralyzed for life or you will die. It's like being in a car accident. These animals are massive. And yet they are directed and turned, not just go that way, but like jump over that by this little piece. And that's the only piece that's really controlling their direction. The reins are not, there's not like multiple points of attachment to the horse. It's really just that. But if that one small piece goes to the left, the horse goes to the left. One small piece goes to the right, the horse goes to the right. How does that relate to our tongues?
Your mind is the breath.
Well, the same tongue is. Now, I will say that this is obviously metaphorical, so it's not just like the fleshy organ in your mouth. I think it's metaphorical for your speech, for your communication. So that, mind is kind of all connected here. But what we say winds up directing a lot of the direction of our lives. If I am somebody who routinely insults people all day, every day, will that shape how my day goes? Will that shape how people treat me? Will that shape my later interactions with them?
Yeah.
Okay, same thing about somebody who's very positive or very complimentary. One of those things, especially in cognitive behavioral therapy, is this concept of self-talk. What happens if you are constantly telling yourself how miserable you are,
Or how bad you are.
or how bad, how inadequate? Nobody likes me. I'm always screwing up. Does that not impact your perception of yourself and the rest of the world? So now what we're saying to other people or to ourselves is also becoming a part of the direction we're going in. Turning to the left, turning to the right, jumping over the creek. And it seems like such a small thing. But
But it's a huge thing. So again, I know I've been talking a lot about this today, but, so because of the way that I was raised, I still have a part of my brain which is imprinted to think that it's ridiculous to come to church. And I will be in church sometimes, and that part of my brain, it's like a person sitting next to me going, are you really doing this today? You know what to be doing today? Why are you here? And I will actually, you know what, I don't need to hear that today. Oh, look, here's Nancy singing. Well, all they're doing is getting ready to speak. I'm not gonna pay attention to you.
Right.
But that thing, so if I listen to that. And it's the metaphorical.
Sure, no,
I
directs you right out the
rest of
door.
my life to be out the door,
Yeah,
honing it on.
right.
So that's interesting that you say that, because we do eternally have to fight with ourselves about all kinds of things, and then what do we make the choices to listen to?
Yeah,
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's something too, can meet our own brains that we're directed to not do something that our very soul is telling us to do.
I mean, I don't want to oversell the mystical element of speaking it into creation or whatever, but there is something that is profound about what we're saying out loud and the way that it affects our environment.
Yeah.
It affects our mood, it affects our perspective, but it also affects the people around us. We've all been around people who are just miserable complainers, and they can kind of just put a damper on a room just by rack. And we've been around people who there seems to be extra sunshine in the room whenever they're around. It can happen, and it seems like very small things, but how much of it is just the words that we use. When you call somebody, if you ever call anybody anymore, I don't speak on the phone all that much, but if oh, hello, or what?
Yeah,
You ever have somebody pick up the phone and say, what?
yeah.
And like immediately that conversation has changed.
Yeah.
No matter what it is you wanted to talk to them about, that conversation has changed. So, it's a small thing, but it can change the direction of our day and potentially change the direction of our life. Could our lives be different in some substantial way if there was a moment where we said or did something that we did it differently? Just saying something. Maybe yes to something or no to something, or we missed an opportunity because we made the wrong stray comment at the wrong time, or we were able to do something because we had sort of laid a groundwork that we didn't even realize we were laying by what we had said. Okay, the rudder of a ship. Rudder of a ship. How is that one like our tongue?
The rudder is what it uses to steer the ship.
Right?
Yeah, so that's why our tongue is what comes from our heart that speaks out. So whatsoever is in our hearts is gonna come out. So that's like the water in our hearts that can, whatever is in it, it's gonna come out.
Yeah. I like that. It's not dissimilar from the bit in the sense of the rudder is usually a relatively small piece of the boat.
Yeah.
And it's in the back. And I mean, theoretically, you could have a hand on the rudder and you could be turning it, but by and large, like the bit, it's controlled from a little bit of a distance. It's the end product of something else.
Yeah.
So the pilot of a ship is control, like maybe it's one of those big piratey steering wheels, or maybe it's like a tiller where you're actually, but you are not at the rudder itself, you're at some other part. Your intention is, I want to go that way. And so you make some kind of motion or you set up some sort of mechanism, and then the rudder turns, and the rudder, which is actually in contact with the water, then moves you in that direction. From the heart, so our mouth speaks. The end result, our tongue is what's in the world, like the rudder is what's in the water. That's what's really touching the water, making contact. So it's pushing the water from side to side, which then in turn pushes the boat to turn to the left or to the right. Our tongue, like my mind is not on display to you, but my words are perceptible to you. That's in the world. What about the fire? It's a small fire like a spark, but even a great forest can be consumed in a blaze.
One cigarette.
One cigarette, yeah. Only you can prevent forest fires.
Yeah.
Especially, that seems like almost every year there's some kind of catastrophic fire out west, California, Washington State, Oregon, something like that. And a lot of it has to do with it's a very dry season. But it happens, occasionally here where we'll have like burn bans because it's been dry. And so you can't, burn a trash pile or something like that. Even very small things.
You can say something, and the next thing you know, it gets spread around via gossip or repeating.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, it's this big chaos and it's a drama. and
Oh, yeah.
whatever, Right, so that's the first thing that came to mind for me is somebody could say something, even offhandedly,
Sure.
and again, the person that heard it could misinterpret it. And then says it to 3 other people who now they have their own interpretations.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with the original comment. And then
Exactly.
it grows and grows and grows. Kind of like, remember when you played telephone when you were a kid?
Uh-huh.
And then.
Yeah. By the end, it's Purple Monkey Dishwasher.
It's so different from
Right.
what you say.
Sure.
Right.
Well, and now with the internet, and stuff can spread worldwide instantaneously. And even just a small piece of it, or it could be edited without your knowledge or consent. So
Yeah, but it can spread, whatever you say, it spreads like that fire.
Right.
And next thing you know, a bunch of people are burned. and
yeah,
maybe-
it's bad enough if it's localized, but then
So that's what I think about it.
Yeah.
It's a fire.
the thing about, so that, get back to the kind of the metaphysical element of the thought in my mind, and I'm able to convey that thought, so now it goes into your mind, is that once it goes out of my mind, I, to some degree, have lost control over it. So once I have spoken it, it's now out.
Yeah.
And I no longer have control over how it's perceived, how it's remembered, its impact. Like, until I can formulate it in my head, like I'm gonna think through this really carefully. So I say this, okay, I don't want you to take this the wrong way. Therefore, no. Yeah, okay. Do this one, like, as I say it, I can try to control as best as possible, but as soon as I say it, the bell has been rung and it cannot be unrung. I have this vision in my mind sometimes of watching me say something as though it were escaping my mouth, and I could somehow catch it and pull it back in. Because like as it comes out, like, oh no, I just like I heard it.
Yeah,
Like it sounded very differently in my mind, but as soon as I heard it out loud, oh, no, 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 no. I should not have said it that way. And you can't pull it back in though.
Yeah, words literally fall out of my mouth, but I can't put them back in, and of course I got more of a problem too, because I'm on the autism spectrum, but it's very much that. The. How powerful it is, and I don't know if you grew up like this, but. I remember growing up with sticks and stones, break my mold.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. And so basically it's a way to say, well, words can't hurt you, they can't whatever, but the truth is. They can sting
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
they can hurt, they can change your thoughts. Like you're talking about, and when thoughts start to change, behaviors change.
Hmm.
And then it just turns into that thing that. Suddenly behavior, yeah.
I think he comes down so strongly about the tongue is basically filled with the fires of hell. Not because every word is wrong and malicious and wicked and diabolical, but it's because the risk is so high and it's so basically omnipresent. We can talk for an hour. And if I say one nasty thing, that's all anybody remembers.
yes.
And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying like that's the stake.
Yeah.
That's the risk, is that any moment playing with dynamite blows everybody up. And there does seem to be an infernal element to that.
About a politician with a hot mic.
You never know what's going to happen, right? There's all sorts of bloopers out there with like the news anchor not realizing that the cameras are still on or still broadcasting or something. I've always got this like flash of a fear every time I turn off the live stream for like Compline or something, that it won't turn off as quickly as I think it
That's
will.
what,
And I'm gonna look like an idiot. And it's not that I'm doing something terrible, like I just said Compline and now I'm, committing a crime, but it's more of just feeling like a dummy because I don't know, like reflexively picked my nose on camera or something. It's really funny because when Rob does morning prayer, he just turns the camera on and then he's like, he sort of preps for the next minute and a half before it actually starts. And he'll, kind of look around and work with his hair and stuff. And I'm like, I'm too nervous to do that. Like, I want to get all that out of the way and then I'll turn the camera on because I just have this vision of doing something kind of just inadvertently, but it just looks awful. And so like, better not do that. Let's just turn it on once I'm finished.
yeah.
So anyway, that is, it's just kind of the truth of what we say. And once it's said, can't get it back. Can't get it back.
Well, but also I think that might lead into, as Christians, we're supposed to make sure that we are seeing the whole person. Like I talked to a person for an hour today and they said whatever, but is that how I'm gonna just view them? Well, in the past it was like, yeah, we had a great conversation, they said this one thing. Like I had to really start getting over that, going, "Oh, that's not the whole person, that's just something that popped out."
Yeah.
Or maybe I misunderstood it. So for me, Christianity is helping me understand that tongue is what it is. And it can take on a life of its own. It certainly does with me. But I try now to view the whole interaction really holistically.
Mhm.
So I think that that's important too, that we try to understand that we're trying to see each other all as human, imperfect, loved, and am I gonna really, that one person said that one thing to me, and am I gonna let that be the whole of how I view them? Or do I want that to be the whole of how I view me?
Yeah.
You know,
All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. I think we're getting a hint here, James. James has gotten burned more than once, I believe. With the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth came praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. I think that James, being a leader in the church, has seen the destructive power of the tongue, potentially his own, firsthand a bunch of times.
Yeah.
And just how much trouble can happen from it. And there's this real dichotomy here that ought to give us pause, and yet it rarely does, that the blessings and the cursings come out of the same mouth. You kiss your mother with that mouth? That was a phrase that used to be said.
I remember that one.
Because it's incongruous to think that the same manner in which we say things in order to bless people, encourage people, demonstrate our love, is the exact same organ, the exact same function and process we use to cut people to pieces and to make them feel like dirt.
Yep.
Again, it's the dynamite element, and we would assume it shouldn't be that way. The same hand that caresses the newborn child so they stop crying and they are soothed to sleep is the same hand that can smack somebody out of malice.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be that way. Something inside of us says, yeah, that doesn't sound right, but it's true. So I think James is just reminding us that it is a reality, but that is that's a part of broken nature. Here's another nice phrase from one of my seminary professors. This is, I use this one periodically. This is from the New Testament professor. He said he hated it when people would excuse their bad behavior by saying, well, I'm only human.
Mhm.
He said, no, Jesus was human and he didn't do that. So when you sin, it's not that you're being only human, you're actually being subhuman. You're being less than human. Our sinfulness may be a part of our nature, but that's the broken part of our nature. Yeah, it's true, but it ought to be shameful. So, I think that's what we're getting to here. And we can underestimate or just overlook the power of what we say. And even the stuff that seems very, very insignificant. And I think that's why we got this concept of small things, the rudder and the spark, that's the forest fire and all that kind of stuff. How much hurt have we caused? Less by a cogent essay on someone's, maligning their character, and how often was it a single quick phrase, half a sentence, 3 ugly words. It takes nothing. I'm sure there's been a moment where you've very carefully considered how you're going to break somebody's heart. Like, I really want to mess with their head, and I'm going to think about the exact way I'm going to press their buttons. But by and large, the harm that we do on a daily basis, how much of that is just like, oh, whoops. Like, had I known that would have bothered you so much, it wasn't even that important to say. I just say stuff, whatever, what's a big deal? Well, it's not a big deal until it is. And how are you going to know in advance?
Some people use the scripture, John 3:16. The Bible says, for God so loved the world that he gave. Some people is like, for God so loved me that I gave.
Fair enough. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done and the humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy, good fruit, impartial and sincere, peacemakers who sow in peace and reap a harvest of righteousness. And so what do we take from that? Well, I'm going to start from the get-go to say this is framed by self-identity, by publicly proclaimed self-identity. If, for instance, I said, okay, who here is right-handed? Raise your hand. Okay. Who here among us prefers chocolate over vanilla? Yeah, whatever. Who here among us is wise? You know, that suddenly it seems impolite, if not self-congratulatory. Oh, I'm wise. Me. That you're talking about me. So, but in essence, there are people who act that way, right? And I think that part of where he's starting from. Who is wise and understanding among you? And often the people who are the wisest are the ones who are the most deprecating about their wisdom. I think we did this in that first chapter, because I do it a lot, but about the biblical wisdom of correct knowledge, rightly applied over time, reliably, whatever. But the idea of if you wanted wisdom about making a moral choice, better to ask the good person rather than the smart professor. You know, just because they can talk about the ethical implications doesn't mean that they are somebody who can be trusted making the right call themselves. But if you know somebody who's they're just like, they've made the right call 50 times in a row, why trust their take on it? They don't have an advanced degree, but so-and-so is a good person. That's the wisdom we're sort of talking about. And that's the kind of person, you're wise. I'd like to ask you something. That's the sort of person who might just say, oh, why are you asking me?
Yeah.
If you identify yourself as wise, maybe you are, but maybe you are also the same sort of person who says, I am so dang humble. I am the most humble person you will ever be blessed to meet.
Humble brag.
Like, really? So rather than proclaim your wisdom, demonstrate your wisdom humbly with these reliable, consistent, good, godly decisions. It's one thing to say it, and it's something very different to do it. How many times have we felt recently that talk is cheap? Even when what is said is the right thing, the actions are not there to follow through. Therefore, how good is that talk really? You know, not so much. Not so much. Bitter envy and selfish ambition. But he says, don't deny the truth. Why would it be important to not deny that you've got some bitter envy and selfish ambition? That sounds like the sort of thing you ought to deny. Like, oh, no, I don't want any of that.
Well, you can't deal with it if you're saying it's not there.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, it's more like honest self-appraisal, taking stock so that you can actually know, do not ask me, you know, how good this cauliflower crust pizza is. I'm the wrong person to ask. I hate cauliflower. And I'm going to tell you, it's either gross, because cauliflower is gross, or I'm going to lie to you and I'm going to say, it's so good. And I'm secretly going to be very angry that you gave it to me without telling me. So my opinion about it is not reliable and it's not particularly useful. You give it to somebody to taste who is okay with it, and they can say, oh, actually, this one's not so good. I've had a better one. It's because of this other thing with it's not quite as crispy or whatever. Again, I'm either just gonna just drill it because I hate it so much, or I'm gonna lie to you. Therefore, but I know that. And I'm telling you, please don't give me anything, like, don't give me some mayonnaise-based dish and ask me my opinion. Because my opinion is, I'm mad at you for giving this to me. Instead, if I'm self-aware enough, I know that I should not be, judging a cauliflower competition. I'm no good at that. In the same manner, if we acknowledge our issues, that's one of my buttons, or I've got kind of a stake in this outcome. I'm not a very impartial judge here. Then maybe that helps us either make a better decision or turn it over to someone else when we ought to. But it's acknowledging, like, yeah, I am kind of crummy at this, and maybe I'm not the person you want to ask. There's real wisdom in saying, I'm not the person to ask about this. More wisdom than stumbling across the correct answer when they asked you. It's just, we don't feel very wise when we tell somebody to ask someone else, because, well, that's showing your ignorance because you don't know. Well, but there's some wisdom in being honest about your ignorance.
The older I get, the more I don't know.
Well, I think it does come down to people who are, they want to, this is my opinion. I want to put my opinion in about everything.
Yeah,
But is the opinion based on any education experience?
Yeah.
Training, whatever valuable, and then it also goes to, we need to think about who we are putting in positions of power, what their opinions might be, because, we have people who are, I'm a flat earther, I want to be president.
right,
It's just your opinion, based on science, doesn't matter how I feel about
right.
it. I sort of feel like,
Might be less than helpful.
yeah, so.
I will say, this is again, this also routinely comes up. When I've met people who are truly excellent in their field, truly excellent, they are almost to a person very humble about what they know in their field. It's the people who start getting good who tend to overestimate how much they know or how good they are. But it's like when you get super good or super knowledgeable about it, you start seeing all that you don't know.
Yeah.
You kind of get re-humbled. So
Well, I had that moment myself, and it happened here in this room, so one day. I was listening to you talk to the kids, and I'd always been like, nobody's gonna know more about theology of deep trees, and then I heard someone else do it, and I thought, wow, somebody's better than me. But honestly, it was a moment of grace, it's like, oh God, you don't know what you just did for me, because now I feel like that. But I think that's where it is, it's like,
Sure.
it's so fun, I've been doing this for 10 years, I've got 3 degrees, 4 degrees. And just to have a moment of, wow, somebody gets this, talks to kids in a different way, and the theology is something that I wouldn't put it that way, but I had that moment here. And it was a really freeing moment, because I went into that place of, now I know how much I don't know.
well, it's a lot of pressure to always be right.
And or always think you have to, it wasn't about being right, it's like, I just gotta know.
Well,
And I don't want that anymore.
I mean that, well, I mean that in a very self-deprecating kind of way, like, when you're someone who feels like you always have to be the knowledgeable one about a situation, there's a lot of pressure, a lot of internal stress on that. As opposed to, I don't know. Sometimes I get it wrong, like, we don't like saying that. We don't like the vulnerability of admitting to possible mistakes or whatever, but it's more honest and it's true. Plus, we set ourselves and others up to fail when it comes with this air of impeccable authority, because it's just not. My authority is not unimpeachable.
Yeah.
And when we're in that position where, well, that's just the way it is, there's a lot of pressure in that with the sense of, well, yeah, you better get it right then. You just told them, you just made this big deal about how right you are. And if it turns out you're wrong, like, you're real wrong.
You're wrong.
Well, then it's also that thing of the beginner's mind versus the expert mind, so a martial arts thing too.
Yeah.
If you have the beginner's mind, you're always understanding that you're a student and you have something to learn from everyone, good or bad, you can still learn something from that. But when you're an expert mind, you're done. This is it, this is all there is to it.
Right.
Yeah,
And then what, that's a dreary place to be.
It is. It is. The art that I teach very purposefully, philosophically chose, instead of a black belt at the dawn level, it's midnight blue. It's like this really dark navy blue. And again, the philosophy behind it was first dan, Chodan, is not the end of a journey. It's just you've kind of gotten to base camp and now you can actually start learning cool stuff. You spend all this time, well, I got my black belt. And black feels very final, very complete. What's darker than black? Nothing's darker than black. So if you're like, I'm done, as opposed to if it's midnight blue, you can always imagine something a little darker.
yeah.
You can always imagine, well, there's a little more to learn. There's a little more to grow or to develop or whatever. And I've just always really appreciated that philosophical and sort of perspective on it, that when we assume finality, we're probably wrong. God can see all ends. I cannot. I can make my best judgment on it, but how good is that really? Man. The wisdom that we are encouraged to demonstrate is peace-loving, considerate, submissive, merciful, fruitful, impartial, and sincere. And that doesn't really sound like the sort of wisdom that we encounter on a daily basis. When we, well, this is the right thing to do, it often feels very dominating or very sharp, very critical. But that's the exact opposite of the sort of godly wisdom that we ought to show. Godly wisdom ought to be gentle and nurturing and loving and kind. And what is the phrase? They don't care. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And maybe that's where we are once again. Anything else? Chapter 3. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.